In today's video, we're going to be looking at the training of some of the top marathoners in the United States right now. In looking at their training, I want to draw out some of the similarities that I think most runners could apply to their own training to really get to their running potential and hopefully help you run your best races maybe by the end of this year or 2023. As a running coach, when I build somebody's training plan, I'm considering their running history, their injury history, what's going on in their life right now, and all those things to build the training plan. So what I want to start with this talk is just looking at everyone's background a little bit. We'll look at their PRs too, and then we'll really deep dive into each person's training. Let's start with Emily Sisson, who of course recently broke the American Marathon record at the Chicago Marathon. In 8th grade, she won the USATF Junior Olympic National title for cross country. In high school, she won 4 state national championships in cross country. Emily's career highlights also include 2-time USA track and field champion, plus 2 national collegiate titles in 2015 as NCAA champion in both the indoor and outdoor 5,000 meter races. Then looking at Keira D'Amato, who is now the second fastest marathoner in the US, she also showed a lot of promise since her youth. Not quite as stellar as Emily, but still pretty good. While in high school in Virginia, she brought home 6 state crowns. Then she went on to become 11-time Patriot League champ at American University. While after college, Emily just consistently ran at a pretty high level. You look at Keira, and she tried to run at elite level for a while, and she did okay, but then she kept on getting injured, and I think she eventually had injury on her foot, and then she took a step back from running for quite a while before she really got back into it and tried to be competitive again. Lastly, we're going to look at Nell Rojas, who's the top American at the Boston Marathon 2 years in a row. I believe she started off playing basketball, and then eventually she realized she was really good at running. It's not a big surprise. Her dad was also a really good runner and still coaches her. But Nell started running in high school as well, and then she went to Northern Arizona University. As a senior at NAU, she did win the Big Sky Conference Championship in the 3,000 meter steeplechase, and I also believe in the 5,000 meters. Now I want to show some of their PRs, but I want to point out that it's kind of not fair to always compare PRs because some of these PRs were set a long time ago and they could probably run faster now if they tried. Or if we're just looking at the marathons, you're going to notice that Keira ran her marathon PR at Houston, a very fast course. Emily ran her PR at Chicago, another fast course. And then you look at Nell, she ran her PR at the Boston Marathon, not as fast as a course. Yes, it has more downhill than uphill, but it's very hilly, and so times are just consistently lower on that course. So to look at everyone's marathon PRs, we can look at Emily, who of course just broke the American women's marathon record for the US in 2:18:29. It was set earlier this year by Keira D'Amato, who ran 2:19:12 at the Houston Marathon. And then again, Nell has been running hillier courses, and at Boston last year, she ran 2:25:57. So let's get to the fun part and start talking about everybody's training. I'm going to start with Emily Sisson, and I'll start off with saying that she's had the same coach since college, Ray Tracy, and he's known for having a very conservative approach. So that means she has built up her mileage very slowly over the years. You could also say she probably built up the length of some of her speed workouts up over the years. And, I think this has done Emily very well. And so that's like the first point I really want you to take away is build up your training slowly and intelligently over the years. Because I think that served Emily very well. Before she got into marathons, she was really focusing on shorter distance races. And that's probably why she has the speed to get the American record in the marathon. So I really think that was an important highlight in Emily's career. Maybe we'll look later at Keira, who has a very different story and obviously is still very fast. But for Emily, yeah, I'm totally going to say that her speed in shorter races is helping her. On that note, if you look at Emily's training, she has made sure to keep that speed even while she's doing marathon training. So if you follow Emily closely, you'll know that she didn't have the best day at the marathon Olympic trials. So she took a step back from the marathon decided to focus on the 10K marathon trials for the US, and she ended up winning the trials in the 10, I should say 10,000 meters since the track, 10,000 meters, and I believe that was a trials meet, and she ran that in 31:03.82. So very impressive speed there. Now, when Emily talked about her buildup for the Chicago Marathon, she still did short intervals, but short is kind of relative, right? Because she said her shortest intervals were 800 meters to 1,200 meters. And you're going to see later on that that's not true for both Nell and Keira. But again, I think because Emily has so much speed to begin with, she doesn't have to do that top end speed as much. And what I didn't see in Emily's training that she probably does is stride, so that does touch on some of the top end speed. But I did think that was interesting to note. She only goes to 800 to 1,200 meters for her shortest intervals in the marathon build. Emily also said that, compared to 10K training, marathon training doesn't look all that different. It's just like some tweaks here and there. Her mileage goes up a little bit. She focuses more on faster long runs and things like that. But she goes to the track and she's always doing her tempo runs. She really stresses the importance of her tempo runs no matter what distance she's training for. And we'll really dig and we'll really deep dive more into her training, but I know everyone's always curious about mileage. So in one article, it stated that she went 110 to 115 miles, but then I read another article that said she goes up to 120 miles, and that's pretty standard. But again, I really want to stress that she didn't just start running 110 to 120 miles. This was a progression really over the years, and then I'm sure even as she started her marathon build, she took her time getting up to that mileage range. So please take that to heart. I'm going to read a couple of quotes from Emily because I think they're very important and insightful when looking at her training. Emily said, "When I'm marathon training, I like to do long run progressions. When I'm not marathon training, I like them to be good, solid efforts, but I won't consider them a workout. I won't run them quite as hard." Then she goes on to say, "I do a lot of 2 times 4 mile tempos, and I do a lot of 7 mile tempos, occasionally 8. When I'm marathon training, I do a little longer. So the volume is less, but still decent. We try to make sure I'm not neglecting those. When I'm marathon training, I still get on the track because I think it actually is important, but I probably only get on the track once every 3 workouts." A little note on that. Some people talk about their training and you kind of take it with a grain of salt, but when Emily says she does 2 times 4 mile tempos, she really does mean that. I was scrolling through her Instagram, and I think this is mostly from last year when she was really talking about her training, but there's a lot of posts saying she did 2 times 4 mile tempos that day. So she really does mean that. Now here's another very important takeaway from Emily's training. As I said, her coach, Ray Tracy, is kind of conservative, and he really believes in full recovery between workouts. So when you look at Emily's training, she typically does 3 easy to moderate days. I think she sometimes says she does 2 if she feels recovered. So 2 to 3 easy to moderate recovery days between key runs. And when I say key runs, that's speed workouts and long runs, especially faster long runs. And this is a theme you're going to see in some of the other runners we talk about later. Furthermore, Emily kind of rotates through speedier track workouts. So depending on what she's training for, that's 400 meters to 1K repeats, tempo runs, longer track workouts, which would be 2 kilometer to 1.5 mile repeats, and then long runs. So it ends up being a 10-day to 2-week cycle versus like the standard 7-day cycle that I know a lot of runners still use. So key takeaways with Emily's training would be conservative and intelligent about how you build up your training over the years. And then always touch base with that short distance speed, even if you're training for a marathon. Then always do your tempos no matter what you're training for. And then take enough time to recover in between those key workouts, and then you can really get the most out of yourself when it's time to run fast. Moving on to Keira D'Amato, we're going to jump right into weekly peak mileage again, and being specific with peak mileage and not average mileage because there's a huge difference there. So peak mileage I've seen anywhere from 100 miles to 130. I do believe it's probably closer to 130. But again, I want to point out that she did not start running off that high mileage. I believe she ran some really fast times just running 100 miles a week. So that's important to note. And then she intelligently built up over time. Now, if you follow Keira on Strava, which I recommend you do, she has a great Strava account, lots of jokes, which I appreciate, you will notice her Strava mileage does not add up to over 100 miles. So my thought is on this is that what we're not seeing is a lot of doubles. And then I was looking pretty closely at her training. There might be some workouts missing. I'm really not positive on this, but there was like some times where I saw like longer breaks in between workouts. I was kind of thinking like she could have fit in a short workout in between. But again, I'm not sure, but just pointing out that while a lot of her training is on Strava and it's cool that she shows some of her key workouts, not all of it is on Strava. But again, I think most of it is probably her second run of the day. An Outside Magazine article says she typically does one track workout and one tempo run per week, often spread out with a lot of like easy miles between. But when you say easy, I think it's more like Emily and easy to moderate when you see some of her paces on Strava. That article said one speed workout, one tempo, but then you also see she does do a lot of hard long runs. So this article may mainly been talking about when she moves down to shorter races. And touching on this again, like Emily, in between marathon races, Keira does a lot of shorter races, and she ran some really fast shorter races this year. I'm not gonna list them all out because she actually, from following her on Instagram, she raced a lot this year, and it was quite impressive. So another takeaway that anyone can apply is whether you're doing like a half marathon to an ultra marathon, step back and focus on shorter races. So if your focus is on a half marathon, maybe before even training for the half, you want to do some 5Ks or 10Ks. If you're an ultra marathon, even if you're doing 100 milers, I'm actually a big believer in ultra runners, like doing a half marathon or something before they really start training for ultras, because touching that speed I've found is extremely beneficial for just about anybody. Now with Keira, I have heard her talk about really doing some top end speed workouts, but what I couldn't find looking at her training, if she does that during her marathon training or not. And as I was thinking of this, I remember Shalane Flanagan, again, correct me if I'm wrong because I didn't fact check myself on this, but I believe Shalane Flanagan said even during marathon training, she would do 200-meter repeats quite often just to like really stay on top of that top end speed and make other paces seem a little bit easier, come a little bit easier. A couple years ago, Keira did do a 5K time trial, and one of her workouts leading up to that was 41 times 200 meters. So that's a lot of 200-meter repeats. If we look at Keira's training from 4 and 3 weeks out from the Houston Marathon, where she ran 2:19:12. She did an easy run on December 22nd, which is a Monday. Then on that Tuesday, December 21st, she ran 13 miles in the morning, and she did 2 miles in 10:02, and then she did 8 times 800 meters, and her splits were ranging from like 2:23, and then her last one, fast one, was 2 minutes and 16 seconds. So that was a pretty good close there. And then what I could tell from her Strava was that Wednesday and Thursday runs were relatively easy. And then on Friday, she did a 22-mile long run with a significant amount of speed. So she did the first 6 miles, like easy to moderate-ish. And then she did a 10-mile tempo, and her pace ranged from, it looks like 5:18, and her fastest mile was 5:09. Then after the 10-mile tempo, she did 1 mile easy, and then she went into a 3-mile tempo, and her paces range from 5:18, and her last mile of that 3-mile tempo was 5:08. So it's a 22-mile long run with altogether 13 miles of speed, really specific marathon effort. From there, so that was Friday, December 24th. It looks like she took Saturday, Sunday, and Monday easy. Again, I'm not positive if I'm missing something or not. So then on Tuesday, December 28th, she ran 14 miles, at least in the morning. She could ran in the afternoon, I'm not sure. But she did a workout of 2K, 2K, 3K, 3K, 2K. And that was another pretty impressive workout. Put her splits on the screen. So then that was on Tuesday. And then it looks like she did Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, easy to moderate according to her Strava. That's where it's like, did she do another workout, maybe a short workout in between that we're not seeing? I'm not sure. But then she did Sunday, January 2nd was another 22-mile long run with 14 miles between 5:35 pace down to 5:07, and that's pace minutes per mile. So as you can see, her long runs were very, very marathon specific, which you'd expect. Again, she was like 4 and 3 weeks out from Chicago. So that's really when you'd expect long runs to become very race day specific. So with Keira, very similar takeaways as with Emily. As you can see, she's not taking just one recovery day in between speed workouts or long runs. She's taking multiple days. As I said, I have heard her say she stays on top of like top end speed during marathon training. I'm not sure exactly how that plays out. And then with Keira's training, you can see with just those 2 weeks of training that I said, her long runs were nine days apart, but they are both very, very specific marathon long runs. Okay, moving on to Nell Rojas. Similar to Keira, you can really look at her training through social media. Keira, again, is on Strava, while Nell, she really talks about her training on YouTube and really gets into detail about what she's been doing for the build-up for New York City Marathon, which is coming up quite quickly. In a fairly recent article, Nell talked about having a week A and a week B. And more specifically, week A includes one high quality speed session, one tempo session, and one easy long run. Then on week B, it's one longer interval workout and one long run with some quality in it. So with this, you can see aspects of not like your typical 7-day training cycle. You can see she rotates through workouts. And then what I think is kind of nice for a lot of people is that not every single long run is hard. Like you saw Keira, I just talked about, she did, her long runs were 9 days apart, but they were both hard. Where Nell rotates, it sounds like really specific marathon workouts and easier long runs. And for my ultra runners out there, I think this is kind of nice because I know my trail runners, you like your easy scenic long runs, or they might not even be easy because you're running uphill. So like there is some like different efforts in there, but you're not like truly doing a speed session within like your long run. So I kind of like this for my trail runners. Something I apply a lot is like, yeah, we got to do some long runs with specific speed, but then, have your days where you just go out on your favorite loop or a cool adventure run and get your miles on that way. So a little love to my trail runners there. So I'd love if somebody could tell me if this is true, this next thing is true or not. I read that for Grandma's Marathon, which is just a few years ago, where Nell ran 2:28:06, that her highest volume for mileage was 75 miles. Now, I know Nell was a triathlete after college. She took a break from just running and I think she was a pretty good triathlete. So she could have been backing that up with cycling or swimming, I'm not sure. Because 75 miles, that's pretty low mileage to be running that fast. But now Nell has talked about running 115 miles to 120 miles. And I think for her last marathon build, she peaked to 124 miles. So you can see like over the years, she's built up her mileage. And interesting to note, Nell said that as she built up her mileage, she decreased her strength training. And I know she still does quite a bit of strength training. You'll see that in some YouTube videos, but she has decreased it significantly. And that makes a lot of sense. Like, as I said in my last video about an elite like strength routines, that, you never want your strength training to compromise your runs, especially if your focus is running and running well. On that note, I want to read a quick quote from Nell Rojas. She says, "You can up your mileage every year, but you have to still be able to recover to feel good and get a quality workout in. If you're A, not recovering or having good workouts, or B, you're getting injured or niggles, usually what happens is you'll have to or be forced to skip a run or workout because you're too tired or you can't complete a workout." And on that note, I think this is an interesting point. I mentioned in her last marathon build, she got up to 124 miles, but she said she got really fatigued from that. And so she actually started her taper about 4 weeks out from Boston Marathon. And in her last 2 weeks before the race, she was logging 62 and 74 miles. So that's a pretty significant taper when your peak mileage is 124 miles. Before we dive into what her actual marathon training looks like, we're gonna see a theme that Nell does a lot of speed between marathon builds. Nell says she does a full cycle of speed work before a marathon build and then does some high quality speed workouts every 2 to 3 weeks in marathon training. Nell's a good running coach herself, and so she's very articulate when she talks about why the speed's so important. And you know, if you improve your 5K times or 10K times, that's gonna bring down your marathon pace or make marathon pace seem easier. So again, like, do what all these top marathoners do and touch on that short distance speed when you can. Okay, getting into specifically what some recent weeks of Nells training has looked like. So about 5 weeks out from the New York City Marathon on October 2nd, Nell did the USATF 10-mile road championships where she finished 4th in 52:20. After that, very smart, she took 3 days, quite easy. And then so her next workout, so again, the race was on Sunday, next workout was on Thursday, and she did a speed workout, which was 3,200 meters at 5:30 and 5:20. Those are mile splits, 5:30, 5:20 were mile splits for that. And then, okay, you can see, unlike Emily Sisson, Nell did some fast 400s. Emily said she only went down to 800 meters, where Nell's going down to 400 meters. So she did but she actually did alternating 400s. So fast 400s and then like easy-ish, smooth 400s. And then she finished off, so this is the bookend of the workout, with another 3,200 meters, and she split 5:09 and 5:05. Again, that's mile pace. Friday was an easy day, and then on Saturday she did an easy-ish run. I'm saying easy-ish because she even admitted that wasn't truly easy because it was on Magnolia Road, which is a high altitude, quite hilly road above Boulder, Colorado. It's pretty hard to run easy on that road, I know from experience. And so she finished off that week at 110 miles. I believe this is what Nell would call like her week A. So she finished off with an easy-ish long run. And so the next week she'll be doing an interval session, and then she'll be doing a more race-specific, faster long run. Okay, so now we have a decent idea of what everybody's training looks like. What I want to dive into now is the key takeaways from everybody of what you can take away that I believe will really help most runners really run to their true potential. So one of the things you've heard me say a couple times already is that everyone took their time to build up their mileage over the course of years and then through each marathon build. So important. I've seen runners peak at 80 miles for like one marathon training block, and then all of a sudden they want to jump to over 100 the next training block. And that's a big difference, and often when people do that they end up getting injured. And I see why. Like, people think if they're running this fast at 80 miles per week, they're gonna run so much faster at 100 miles per week. But what you often find is that's not true. And it's not true because their body's not ready for the jump in mileage. And so because they're not ready for the jump in mileage, you actually see a decline in performance because, you know, their body is just breaking down and they're not ready for it. And so, yeah, their paces basically get slower or they get injured. So don't think a big mileage jump is going to lead to great improvements. It could if you're quite low mileage and you have the capacity to build up and feel good while doing so. But again, if you're already running like somewhat high mileage, and I consider like 80 miles for sure, that could be considered high mileage, and then you're going even higher mileage to like 100 or past, like you really have to be smart about doing that. And a good way to do that is always, one, just like increase your training slowly. Two, pay attention to how you feel. Whenever somebody's performance declines from a big jump in mileage, there's always really good signs from their body that they can't handle it, and yet they keep going because their mind or their ego is telling them, nope, I said I was going to do this much mileage, I'm going to do it, and then they forget to listen to their body. So don't do that. Another big takeaway that I really truly think would benefit most people is in between like your goal races, which are often like, well, for these people, it's marathons. Also going to talk to ultra runners and stuff like that. In between those buildups for the longer races, make sure you're going back and working on speed. And yeah, you can just do shorter workouts for a while or add in more speed, but I actually think training for a shorter race every now and then, or even just doing a time trial, can be really beneficial across like all longer distances. Since winter is coming up for a lot of people, yeah, some people need to build their base over the winter. For some people, it's especially like my ultra runners or distance runners, it can be a good time to take a step back and wait to build up your mileage, and instead just train for that 5K race, train for that 10K race or something like that. Okay, this next one, I truly think most people would benefit if they did this. And that is taking 2 to 3 easy days in between key runs. Again, that's gonna be speed workouts and faster long runs. I think that's huge. I know if you look at Kipchoge's training, he doesn't always do that, but you have to remember he really dedicates his life to training, and he doesn't have other stressors, and it could also have to do with his physiology and stuff like that, where he can get away with it. But all these women I've talked about, they're taking 2 to 3 easy days in between stuff, easy to moderate. In my experience, coaching people for close to a decade now, of a range of abilities, taking 2 to 3 easy days in between key workouts leads to a lot of progress, much more progress than doing a speed workout or key run every other day. So if you're not doing that, I would highly consider at least experimenting with it. You know, you never have to commit to anything long term. You can just experiment with this for I think you should at least do it for a couple of months to really see the true results. But if you haven't done before, again, at least try it. I really think it's worth experimenting with. And as Nell showed, even if you're restricted to doing your long runs on the weekends, there's still a way you can build that idea in. Specifically if you're doing a faster long run one weekend and then an easier weekend the next weekend. If you're doing an easier long run, you don't need as much time to recover from it, especially if your body is already adapted to the mileage. So play around with it. Another thing you can see with every runner here is that they're rotating through some short intervals or track intervals, tempos, and some faster long runs. And yeah, I know that's gonna be pretty standard for most people, but I also know that some coaches do have a different philosophy and they don't rotate through things like that. But obviously for these women, again, they're some of the fastest marathoners in America. It works really well, and it's also a strategy I use for my own coaching, and I've also seen it work great for people of all ability. So it's definitely something I think most runners should apply to their own training. So now that you've learned the training of some of these elite marathoners, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Is there something you haven't thought of before and then now you're going to apply after hearing how these women train? Or, is there something I missed? I can only gather so much information. I try to do a lot of research and fact check myself, but if you know them personally, you might have more insight. And so I'd love to hear that in the comments below as well. And yeah, as always, whether you're training for a 100-mile race or just trying to run 1 mile, you belong here. And I'm so honored to be part of your running journey. Until next time, keep running wild.